Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. With the year winding down and awards season starting up, I figured I'd do my own game awards this year. The conditions for a game to be eligible for this awards show are as follows. The game has to have been played in one of my streams or present in one of my YouTube videos between the end of November this year and the beginning of December last year. Release year has no bearing on eligibility. To warm you guys up, I've divided the games into several categories. The categories are as follows: fighting games, mobile games, revisited games, Touhou games, management games, and action games. Our first category, fighting games, is also our shortest category. With two strong options between Tekken 8 and Street Fighter 6, I wouldn't fault anyone for their choice here. As my first Tekken, the unique input style and the visceral impacts when you strike a blow are both new and a big plus for me, but the emphasis on variable combo and punish strings and the slightly slower pace also have a strong appeal. Street Fighter has some solid iterations on classic designs and combo execution, and its strike-throw gameplay is as solid as ever. With that in mind, my fighting game of the year will be Tekken 8. I think that I personally have a greater interest in Tekken. Street Fighter might be a solid iteration on a popular franchise, but the dated fixed-angle jumps grind my gears as a fan of anime fighters, and drive impact, well, admittedly, a necessary evil in the current iteration of the game, doesn't make me feel any better about it. Tekken is an absolute joy to play, and stands out from the crowd of 2D fighters, even ignoring that third dimension, and that's exactly what you need to get ahead. For our second category, mobile games, the winner was significantly more contested. We played a total of 6 new mobile games on stream this year, including Zenless Zone Zero, Honkai Star Rail, Touhou Lost Word, Punishing Grey Raven, Limbus Company, and Counterside. Longtime viewers of the stream likely have an inkling of who the winners will be, but for the rest of you it might be a little more difficult. The runner-up in this category, despite their country being known for making the grindiest MMOs known to man, somehow managed to not be the grindiest mobile game I've ever played. Hailing from Korea, it's Counterside. This game has a compelling story, very solid visuals, and sits in the somewhat sparsely populated genre of line battle VN hybrid. Although quite entertaining, its event stories not being FOMO'd out of existence, possessing a somewhat unique setting, and almost certainly being worth a look, the middlingly aggressive power creep, RNG-dependent gearing, and competitive nature of its multiplayer can leave a noticeable mark on your impression of the game as you progress. For my best mobile game of the year, surprisingly hailing from Korea yet again, is the outstandingly good Limbus Company by Project Moon. I actually passed on playing this game at launch, having heard very little about the developers or their new title, and I have to say in hindsight that was certainly not the correct choice. This game has outstanding visuals and visual design. The story is fantastic, it's gripping, the characters are extremely entertaining to follow. The world somehow manages to unveil some new horror every chapter, each worse than the last. The setting has surpassed that corporate dystopian nightmare we're all used to and is well into what I would describe as a corporate hellscape. Most of the events are linearly tied into the story and available as you play through the main story. This game, I've heard tell, is known as the gacha that doesn't really know how to gacha, and I have to confirm it's probably more Dolphin or free-to-play friendly than even Azure Lane. I bought their Battle Pass, which appears to expire roughly every 3 to 4 months, and when the season ended, deleting half of my stored currency for buying SSRs, which they give you from the Battle Pass, I lost, no joke, 4 SSRs worth. How many games have you ever accidentally had the currency to confidently get 4 SSRs, let alone 8 in? Yeah. The late game consists of a fairly enjoyable roguelike dungeon and a boss rush mode. There isn't really an insane grind, although the core cast is somewhat large and feels unwieldy in the early chapters of the story. The fact that it doesn't really and focuses on individual sinners each canto or chapter, they pays dividends in the later chapters as the strongly established characters are pushed and pulled by the narrative. I could honestly gush about this game for 15 minutes about how good it is. We haven't even talked about how it uses opposed roles for combat, which is something you basically never see in games outside the tabletop role-playing variety. It's so cool. Honestly, I wish the best for the team who just so unexpectedly made such a great game. Next up are revisited games. These are games I played in the past, likely on stream, that we've come back to for one reason or another. These games include Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance, Bioshock, Perfect Cherry Blossom, Imperishable Night, Guilty Gear Strive, and Overwatch. Now, I typically don't revisit games I think will be boring to revisit, and honestly, any one of these could be a respectable choice. Even Overwatch, which I think is somewhat diminished by its story work effectively gutting your ability to earn cosmetic rewards, still has solid core gameplay. This decision was actually pretty hard, and I really wish I could somehow stick a 3-way tie in here, but there's only space for one winner. I hadn't played Guilty Gear Strive in over a year, and the cracks in its multiplayer ranking system really started showing when I found out you can only downrank so far. Honestly, not a great game to revisit if you've been taking a break from fighters. The runner-up for this category, though, is one of my favorite Touhou games. It has an absolute banger of a soundtrack, and I frequently find myself wanting to replay it just on a whim. This year's runner-up for Best Revisited Game of the Year is Touhou 7 Perfect Cherry Blossom. The winner, a game I hadn't played in literal years that was most certainly worth revisiting, perhaps only for the fact that I hadn't played it in so long, is Platinum Games' Metal Gear Rising. This and Bayonetta are two of my favorite action games. I've beaten this game at least 4 times now, and the memes, the OST, and the bosses still hold up extremely well. I will say the DLC was a little more frustrating than my rose-tinted goggles may have given me the impression of, but a replay of this title every few years is certainly well-deserved. This was a really tough choice. It honestly felt so bad to shaft Touhou 8. Bioshock doesn't feel like it deserved the disrespect, but honestly, even the remastered Bioshock was showing its age when you started playing. It was still good, but I feel like Metal Gear Rising held up much better. Now, over the last couple years, I've been playing through just about every game in the Touhou series and several of the fan games. To keep the other categories from feeling incredibly crowded, I separated all the Touhou games that were new to me this year into their own category of Touhou games. Now this year, I touched on Highly Responsive to Prayer, I played through Story of Eastern Wonderland, Great Fairy Wars, Double Dealing Character, Legacy of Lunatic Kingdom, Wily Beast and Weakest Creature, Unconnected Marketeers, Unfinished Dream of All Living Ghost, Luna Knights, and Genso Wanderer Reloaded. For reference, that was Touhou 1, 2, 12.8, 14, 15, 17, 18, 19, and 2 fan games. As this category is pretty large, I'd like to give an honorable mention to Luna Knights. Despite the fact that I don't really like Metroidvanias, this game was pretty good. The runner-up in this category was extremely difficult and had one of my favorite gimmicks of any Touhou game. I'm of course talking about Great Fairy Wars. Yosei Daisenso, or Great Fairy Wars, despite being a short 3 levels, is extremely challenging, yet also manages to completely rework every single boss fight on every route. It was honestly impressive how much bigger the game felt in practice over how it was on paper. I absolutely loved the ice gimmick despite how exhausting it could be on my hands. Definitely worth picking up if you're in for a challenge. My favorite game from among the Touhou titles I first played this year might surprise some of you. It was Touhou 17, Wily Beast, and Weakest Creature. This game has a couple tracks I really dig, but moreover, it's one of the only Touhou games that made me replay a boss in practice for fun. I really liked the Mayumi fight. I liked it enough to go back and flawless each and every phase in practice. I played through this game as every character in rapid succession, and I can easily see myself going back for another round soon. I was actually pretty nervous to start Legacy of Lunatic Kingdom, but given that I did a bombless point device run as my first run, I can confidently say that I don't hate that game. It's pretty good, but not good enough to beat out Fairy Wars and 17 in my opinion. Now, for our second to last category, we have management games. I put 4 games up in the category this year, including Lobotomy Corporation, Against the Storm, Warhammer 40k Mechanicus, and Frostpunk. Now, getting right into things, the runner-up is going to be Frostpunk. This game is a solid survival city builder that provides a decent challenge with several enjoyable scenarios to play through. Its biggest downside, however, is that once you've played through the first scenario, you've seen all the tech there is, and once you've exhausted all the scenarios, there really isn't anything left for you in free build mode. The game's great for 40 or so hours, but after that there's very little incentive to continue playing, as opposed to other city builders like Skylines, which are like more Zen focused, and you kind of just get lost in reworking stuff. Our winner for Best Management Game of the Year, showing themselves to be continually underestimated by me and the wider gaming community, is surprisingly another title by Project Moon, Lobotomy Corporation. I picked this game up after playing through Limbus Company, and hearing that all their other titles were in the same setting, I grabbed both of them. Honestly thought I'd play this for like 4 hours and drop it to go play Library of Ruina, given the somewhat unfavorable Steam reviews and longer form commentary I saw on YouTube. This game, though, it somehow manages to fuse like that enjoyable Zen-like state you reach with like city builders and civilization, while also like somehow spending half its time being like a frenetic survival game like Frostpunk. Maybe it's the way you're like more or less entirely responsible for the chain of disasters that gets half your staff killed. Maybe it's their decision to just keep slowly adding more plates to manage every day until something goes wrong. This game has a lot going for it, despite not being a city builder. It's got this great discovery aspect where you're not quite sure what you need to be doing to succeed on new tasks. It's got like this roguelike element for replayability where like the new abnormality options you get each day is random per run, so all the runs aren't going to be the same. So you got this exploration, you got this big exploration thing. It's got this weird meta element sometimes where like it adds some unusual spice to your normal management gameplay. For an example, there's a certain entity that when you try to look at its information in menus, it just closes your game. Working as intended, by the way, not a bug. There's another that operates differently if it's on screens. I haven't actually finished this game, but like, I'm confident it's as good as Frostpunk. And it likely has more replayability due to like aforementioned factors. Be careful when playing this game. You might sit down to like just play through one day or 15 minutes of gameplay and find that it's like suddenly 5 a.m. About as dangerous as Civ for that. You've been warned. Our final category for my Game Awards is action games. We actually have a few games that came out this year in this category. Included are Lies of P, Last Epoch, Space Marine 2, Helldivers 2, Control, Metro Last Light, Higurashi Basketball, Muse Dash, and Dead Space. This was another contentious category. There are a lot of good experiences here. Control, Metro, and Dead Space were fantastic single-player shooters. Lies of P was a solid Souls-like. Last Epoch was a fairly solid ARPG. Helldivers 2 did a multiplayer PvE shooter well, and Space Marine 2 did shooter in general quite well. In the end, it came down to what I felt I could suggest to the most people and what I was most likely to sit down and play again. This brings us rather quickly to our action game of the years, which is Helldivers 2. An extremely enjoyable 4-player PvE shooter where you take on the role of a disposable drop trooper with access to heavy ordnance, liberating the galaxy from tyrannical machines and endless swarms of bugs. I found myself quite shocked at my own choice given that I'm a fairly large 40k fan, and had a moment in the tutorial where I was genuinely in disbelief at what was physically possible in a video game in 2024. Despite being so impressive and having a solid campaign and some decent multiplayer missions, I feel like once you're done with the game, it's really a matter of time until you move on. Helldivers 2, despite some questionable choices by the developers in its ongoing service, seems to be consistently having something new or interesting going on that makes it tempting to drop in for a game or two. I can see myself dropping into Helldivers here and there, but I'm struggling to see myself doing it for Space Marine 2 nearly so often. I'm not certain Last Light was better than 2033. Maybe it's nostalgia, but it's hard to put it above Space Marine 2, which was genuinely impressive, even if the storytelling in Metro is better. Control also had a better story than Space Marine, and I really enjoyed the mystery the developers crafted. If I had to choose a runner-up, I'd probably be picking Control or Dead Space. While I don't see myself returning to Control anytime soon, its unique story and gameplay made it exceptionally compelling the first time through. Dead Space already seems to be a classic title at this point, and it certainly manages to do for me what Resident Evil regularly fails to do: deliver a compelling third-person horror shooter campaign with enjoyable gameplay. I'm sorry, Resident Evil fans, I've bounced off like 3 of your games at this point. Dead Space feels like the space version of what you want your game to be. And with that, we've come to the end of our little awards show. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Thanks for watching, like, subscribe, and have a great week.